Family is supposed to keep you safe. Mine learned how to pick the lock from the inside and called it love. The first lesson was simple. If you scream, the walls will hold their breath and pretend they didn't hear. The second lesson was hanging right there on our front door, a busted brass latch that had split like a wishbone months ago and never got fixed. I used to believe a broken lock meant freedom, like you could just step outside whenever you needed air. Turns out, a broken lock just means anyone can walk in. And they did, whenever they pleased, with whatever version of themselves the day required. Our house learned to swallow sound. It ate apologies first. We lived in a one-story box with a shallow porch and a view of the dead-end street that looked like a cigarette burn on a map. Morning light came through thin curtains the color of old teeth. The carpet held its own weather, damp near the windows when it rained. Inside, everything had a double life. The couch that could be a bed if you weren't picky, the TV that was also a judge, the kitchen table, a courtroom. There was always a trial going, evidence, a chipped mug, a slammed drawer, the way my brother tossed a key up, caught it, and grinned like he'd invented gravity. He said it calmed him. Click, catch, click, catch. A little chrome trick that traced the air between us. I learned the route of that spinning key better than the bus schedule. Up, flash, drop, palm, pocket. Sometimes he'd let it fall on purpose so it hit the floor with a sound like a small accident, like a bicycle tipping over on a quiet street. The sound made my scalp tighten. The sound said, "Pay attention." Outside, neighbors watered the same patch of grass every evening, their hoses purring like house cats. Mrs. Doyle waved at anyone and everyone, but not at our house. Our mailbox leaned like it had been hit by a truth it couldn't handle. People knew things, or they knew enough to suspect. And still the street stayed polite. Polite as just fear in church clothes. Breakfast, my mother barked, and it wasn't a question. Her hair was always pinned too tight, like she needed to keep her face from slipping. She moved like someone who'd promised the world she wouldn't take up too much space and then punish the world when it made her prove it. The frying pan hissed. The radio muttered headlines nobody in our kitchen could afford. I took my plate to the edge of the table and kept my elbows in. My brother sat across from me, chair tipped back on two legs as if balance came easy to him, and the rest of us were overreacting to gravity. He wore the same washed-out hoodie nearly every day, sleeves chewed, pockets stuffed with coins and that key. It wasn't for anything anymore. The key belonged to a lock we no longer had. He kept it anyway. A souvenir of control, a small metal sentence. He reached across the table and pinched my wrist where the skin is thin. Not hard, just enough to map out the future. His eyes were an ordinary brown you could lose things in if you weren't careful. He smiled without showing his teeth. "You're jumpy," he said, like I'd told a joke he approved of. My mother didn't look up. She added salt she hadn't tasted to eggs no one could finish and said, "Eat." Pattern interrupt, a siren far away, brief as a thought. Then it was gone, like a car you're not expecting that doesn't turn into your street after all. Relief can feel like embarrassment if you practice it too often. I breathed in and counted to 5 because someone once told me that helps. The kitchen clock coughed toward 8. The radio said the chance of rain was 30%. In our house, it was closer to 90 and the forecast never changed. At school, the hallways smelled like pencil shavings and detergent. The counselor's poster said, "If you see something, say something," next to a cartoon eye too cheerful to belong in any real head. I kept my sleeves down and my head up and told my face to be normal. The thing about learning to be quiet, it sticks to you like lint. By lunchtime, I'd collected enough of it to build a second self. Mrs. Hart caught me at the water fountain and looked at me too long. the way adults do when they're counting reasons to ask a question and talking themselves out of it at the same time. "You doing okay?" she asked finally, soft and casual, like she might forget the answer even as I gave it. "I'm fine," I said, and we both pretended not to hear the echo of that word as it bounced down the corridor and crashed into the locker at the end. Back home, the afternoon sulked in the blinds. My brother stood in the doorway to my room like he was occupying land he'd won in a bet. "You've got my charger," he said. I didn't. I handed it over anyway, found, not stolen, because some arguments are just invitations to step into a bear trap. He took it, tossed the key up. Click, catch. "Thanks," he said, and waited like I owed him more English. When I didn't, he left. The door never closed all the way. The broken latch left a gap, a breath, a reminder. The house could see me. I taped the inside of my window frame with a strip of blue painter's tape I'd found in the junk drawer and pressed it hard with the pad of my thumb. The tape made a clean line against the chipped white paint. It wasn't a solution, but it looked like a boundary, and sometimes that's all you need to keep the night from walking in. Pattern interrupt, the smell of rain, fast, sudden. It startled the heat off the sidewalk. I cracked the window and let the damp into the room like a guest I trusted. Cars hissed by. Somewhere a dog barked once and thought better of it. The key sound drifted from down the hall, click, catch, and stopped. For a moment, the house forgot what it was. I counted the things I could control. 1, the breath going in and out of my chest. 2, the blue line on my window straight as a rule. 3, the pencil by my bed and the notebook under it, where I collected my own small evidence, a list of dates, times, words I could prove if I ever needed to be believed. The list wasn't much, but it was heavier than silence. When the rain thinned, the air turned glassy and smelled like metal. My mother called my name from the kitchen in a tone that meant come now, not come when you're ready. I stood, smoothed the blanket, checked the tape again for no good reason and every good reason. On the way out, I glanced at the broken lock on my door and caught my face in the dull brass. It looked like a version of me half erased. Family is supposed to be a shelter. Ours was a weather system. If you stayed still long enough, it tested every seam. That night, the forecast held, and the walls, faithful as always, forgot how to speak. At the bus stop that morning, Mrs. Doyle tugged her curtain back 2 inches and let it hover there like a blink she refused to finish. I could feel her looking at the purpling bloom under my sleeve, the way people watch a storm over someone else's house. Interested, relieved. When the bus coughed up diesel and squealed to a stop, her curtain fell shut. The neighborhood exhaled, practiced and clean. We have rituals for pretending. On the bus, I took the seat behind the driver, the one where the mirror steals glances. My brother sat 3 rows back with his friends, shoe on the edge of my seat like a footnote daring me to read it. He popped the key with his thumb and let it spin over his knuckles, a cheap coin trick with a private price. A boy across the aisle asked if he could try. My brother smiled like a loan shark granting mercy and flicked the key to him. It landed in the boy's palm and he laughed at its weight. "It doesn't go to anything," my brother said. "That's the point." The boy tossed it back and the air between them clicked closed. I watched the mirror cut the scene into tiny squares and file it away in my head under. Evidence no one wants. Pattern interrupt. A blue jay dive-bombed the rooftop outside homeroom, hitting the window with a hollow thud that made everyone flinch. Mrs. Hart's chalk squeaked a hard letter S and halted. For 3 seconds the room was a held breath, then pencils resumed, the jay gathered itself, and the lesson moved on without him. I underlined the word photosynthesis and thought about the light we all fake to keep from curling in. At lunch, the cafeteria turned into a mouth, noise, heat, teeth. A carton of milk burst under someone's elbow and spread like a white map, and a janitor's mop arrived so quickly it looked rehearsed. I stood with my tray and scanned for empty space like a lifeguard looking for rip currents. A girl I barely knew waved me over to the end of her table. She had glitter on her eyelids and eyes that cataloged everything. "You okay?" she asked and arranged her fries into a fence. "I'm fine," I said. "Standard issue." She nodded like she believed me and changed the subject to a math quiz. Kindness can be a door that you're afraid to open in case it slams. After last period, the nurse called me in under the pretense of measuring my height. She taped a strip of paper against the wall, had me back up, and made the soft atmosphere of concern that workers learn to manufacture for audits and holidays. "Any headaches?" she asked. "Any dizziness?" I stared at the poster behind her desk, a pair of cartoon eyes with lashes like grass, and read as caption, "Tell us if it hurts." The room smelled like bleach and bubble gum. "I'm fine," I said too quickly. She clicked her pen. "You know you can tell me if something's wrong." I pictured her initialing a form and sliding it into a folder until the folder became a stack and the stack a shelf and the shelf a room. Paper knows how to keep quiet better than walls. "I'm good," I said, and she let me go with a bandage I didn't need. Pattern interrupt. The school loudspeaker crackled mid-sentence. Static, a cough, the principal mispronouncing Thursday, then went silent. A boy laughed too loud and earned detention on principle alone. By the time the sound returned, we had all learned we could do without it. I walked home slower than I had to, tracing the seams in the sidewalk with the tip of my shoe, adding dates to the list in my head. A police cruiser rolled past at funeral speed, the officer inside steady-faced, eyes forward, the kind of looking that sees only roads and not people. When I turned onto our block, the front door was open, the broken latch confessing itself to the street, like it had been caught gossiping. Inside, the house smelled like onions and lemon pledge, like someone trying to cover yesterday. My mother didn't look up from the sink. She washed the same plate in small, furious circles and asked how my day was with a voice that meant I should say 2 words and leave. "It was fine." She set the plate in the rack like it had failed inspection. "Your teacher called about you not eating. Don't embarrass me." I opened the fridge, closed it, opened it again, chose an apple because it doesn't make noise when you drop it, then put it back because bruises show. My brother came in behind me and let the key skim my sleeve. Static lifted the hairs on my forearm. He plucked a chip from the bag on the counter, crushed it slowly between his molars like ice. "She's jumpy." He reported to the room, and the room agreed by remaining itself. Dinner was the usual courtroom. The news droned from the living room like a broken oath. My mother offered grace with a voice that had nothing soft in it. I watched her hands. Good hands, steady hands, the kind that could sew a hem straight even in poor light, and wondered when hands learned to lie. My brother reached for the salt and knocked over my water. It drowned my napkin, my thigh, the edge of my notebook hidden under the table. He smiled at the spill like he'd won a raffle. I dabbed at the page I'd been keeping, dates, times, words, and the ink bled into a cloud. My mother glanced at the mess and then at me. "Clumsy," she said, and passed him the salt. Pattern interrupt. A car backfired outside and the porch light flicked twice. A nervous tick, then steadied. My mother's face didn't move. My brother's did. A flicker, the way a mask fails for one frame in a cheap horror movie. He slid the key across the table to himself and tapped it, tap, tap, until the rhythm landed under my skin. I lifted my glass and drank the last of the water, warm as breath. Later, I brought the damp notebook to my room and laid it open on the windowsill under the blue tape like a small flag. The page wrinkled as it dried and the words went soft at the edges, but they were still readable if you leaned in and wanted them to be. I wanted them to be. Outside, the streetlights buzzed and a moth wrote its clumsy love letter to the bulb. I pressed my palm against the window. The glass gave me my reflection back, doubled with the room behind me, and I thought how every mirror in this house told two stories and refused to pick one. I tried to do homework. Numbers swam. Paragraphs pretended to be busy. From down the hall came the sound of the TV, laughter that wasn't laughter, the commercial guy promising a life that fits in a pill bottle. My mother's laugh joined, late and brittle. My brother's didn't. He didn't need to audition for happiness. He walked past my door without knocking and paused in the gap where the lock should be. He didn't enter. He didn't need to. The key clicked once in the hall, and the click stayed in my room long after his footsteps faded. In the dark, I counted the things I could name out loud without waking anyone. Lamp, book, tape, breath, window, sky. I added one more. I said my own name and waited to see if the house knew it. The silence that followed felt like a kind of answer I wasn't ready to accept. So I sharpened my pencil by the light of my phone and wrote today's date again on a fresh line. Then I wrote what I could prove. Then I closed the notebook and slid it under the mattress and lay very still, listening for rain that didn't come. The bathroom mirror in the morning gave me back a version of myself I didn't recognize. Skin sallow under the light, a purple halo rising along my wrist like a bruise trying to become a map. I tugged my sleeve down, breathed through my nose, and wrote the date into the notebook before the coffee smell could reach my room. The pencil dug hard enough to tear the page's edge. It wasn't confession. It was an alibi drafted in advance. In the kitchen, my mother was measuring silence like flour. The radio murmured a gospel station. She kept the volume low, as if faith could be whispered into cooperating. My brother sat at the table with his chair tipped back, two legs flirting with gravity, the key walking across his knuckles like a trained animal. Tap, spin, catch. He didn't look at me when he said, "You're late?" I wasn't. He'd like to start the day with amending the record. Pattern interrupt. Outside, a garbage truck hissed and exhaled, the metal jaw clapping the bin so loud the salt shaker jumped. My mother's eyes flicked to the window and back to the sink. When the truck's groan faded up the street, the house resumed its usual hum of withheld opinions. On the bus, I took the front seat again, the one that let the driver's mirror watch me the way a pond watches a bird. 3 rows back, my brother's laugh spliced through the chatter. Thin, precise, an edit you only notice after replaying the whole scene in your head. He tossed the key to a friend. The boy weighed it, puzzled, and asked what it opened. "Everything," my brother said, and scavenged the key back out of the air before anyone could argue with it. At school, the day arranged itself into small tests. A girl I didn't know lingered by my locker, complimented my hair, then pointed to a split end with a sad little smile, charity disguised as kindness. Mrs. Hart wrote dignity on the board for a civics warm-up and asked what it meant. Hands went up. Words like self-worth, respect, rights. I kept my hand down and counted the ways the words sounded different when spoken by people who could go home and lock their doors. Pattern interrupt. The intercom sputtered and coughed out a half-sentence about the pep rally, then cut to static long enough for everyone to trade glances. When it returned, the principal's voice was an octave too cheerful, like a parent announcing good news over a freshly broken plate. The class laughed. I didn't. I was thinking about plates. At lunch, I ate an apple because apples bruise quietly. A boy at the next table asked if I had a boyfriend. When I said no, he shrugged like he'd guessed and returned to his fries. On the way to science, Mrs. Hart intercepted me by the stairwell. "You look tired," she said softly, the way people lower their voices when they're near an animal that might bolt. "Do you want to sit out PE today?" I said I was fine because I needed her to let me go. She touched my elbow, 2 fingers, brief, careful, and told me her door was always open. Doors are always open in schools. You just have to live long enough to reach them. When I walked home, the air felt like wet cloth. A storm was building somewhere we couldn't afford. The porch light had died, and my mother had strung a dim lamp from the ceiling by a cord that looked one tug from surrender. The broken lock on my bedroom door gleamed dull and useless. I pressed the blue painter's tape back along the window frame, the color a stubborn vein against the chipped paint. It steadied me. Small straight lines often do. My brother leaned into the doorway without knocking. "You took my charger," he said. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked past me, fished in my drawer, found his charger exactly where he'd left it weeks ago, and held it up like he'd uncovered a crime. On his way out, he paused at my shelf, picked up the small plastic horse I'd kept since I was little, and bent its already cracked leg until it snapped with a soft, deliberate click. He set it down with the calm of a surgeon. "Don't leave your stuff everywhere," he said to the room that wasn't his. Pattern interrupt. Thunder rolled far off, a low bowlful of sound. For a second, the lamp dimmed and steadied, like the house had taken a breath and tasted the weather. I was suddenly certain storms learned our names by listening at the windows. Dinner was noodles and a lecture. My mother asked about homework and never heard the answers. She warned me about girls who make mistakes, and I nodded like she was warning someone else. My brother threaded the key through his fingers with priestly focus. When my glass tipped, water slid toward the edge of the table and pooled under my notebook where it hit on my lap. I lifted it quick, patted the cover dry with a dish rag, felt the page buckle under my thumb. "Clumsy," my mother said, but she was looking at me like I'd dropped something more valuable than a glass. After dishes, I took the notebook into the bathroom and blotted the damp spots with toilet paper that left tiny white constellations stuck to the ink. I peeled them away carefully and read the entries aloud under my breath. Dates, times, phrases, evidence. Speaking them made them heavier, as if words gained mass and moisture. Pattern interrupt. A siren went by without urgency. The red light brushed the window in 3 quick strokes and vanished. I thought of paint, of warnings, of how color moves faster than truth. Night found the house obedient. The living room TV narrated a show where problems were tidy and sponsored. My mother's laugh was late again, a recorded track misaligned with the scene. My brother stood in the hallway, framed by the missing lock like a portrait of someone mistaken for a door. He rolled the key along his palm and looked at me as if I were the knob. I pretended to study. The numbers on my worksheet looked like a crowd pretending not to witness anything. I folded the page, slid it into my backpack, and placed the notebook under my mattress where the springs could keep it company. Then I lay on my side and made a list in my head of things that were mine. The blue line, the breath, the pencil, the name I refused to give up, the knowledge that even if a lock is broken, you can still push a chair against a door. Pattern interrupt. The rain arrived all at once, hard enough to erase footstep sounds on the sidewalk, hard enough to make the whole block feel like it belonged to the sky. I pressed my palm flat to the cool window and watched the glass collect everything and return nothing. Somewhere down the hall, the key clicked once, a small metal star. I closed my eyes and counted backward from 50, not to sleep, but to mark the distance between this moment and whatever the next one wanted to be. The night it happened, I learned that silence can be louder than screams. The latch on my bedroom door was already broken, so the only barrier left was my breath, shallow and slow, hoping to fool the dark into forgetting me. But the footsteps didn't forget. They paused outside, then entered, casual as a shadow that knew it belonged. The key clinked against the nightstand, a coin tossed into a rigged well. I stared at the ceiling and counted the cracks like escape routes drawn by a cruel architect. The mattress dipped. The smell was salt and laundry detergent that had given up. My body decided to survive by leaving me. I floated near the ceiling, watching myself stiffen, listening to the small noises no one else would ever catalog. The spring squeak, the shallow intake of breath, the whispered word, mine. Pattern interrupt. Somewhere outside, a dog barked, frantic and shrill, then stopped as if it had been reminded of its place. When it was over, he rose without hurry, pocketed the key, and walked out. He didn't look back. He never had to. The door stayed ajar, mocking the word privacy like a bad joke. I stayed curled in the corner of the bed, trembling, eyes fixed on the ceiling where nothing had changed. That was the insult. The world remained intact, furniture upright, walls unmoved, air thick but steady. Only I was different, erased and rewritten in the same body. I slipped to the bathroom and locked the door from the inside, the only lock that still worked. The mirror caught me unkindly. My lips were bitten raw, my eyes wide as if they'd just witnessed a crime scene, and they had. I twisted the tap, let the water run hot until steam blurred my reflection. My mother knocked once, sharp and impatient. Don't waste water. She didn't ask anything else. She never did. Days blurred afterward, as if the calendar itself wanted to forget. I carried myself like a puppet, joints stiff, strings invisible. At school, I laughed when others laughed, but the sound came delayed, mismatched, like subtitles on the wrong reel. Teachers called my name and I answered too fast, eager to prove I was still present. But part of me was gone, archived in a silence no one else could read. Then came the missed cycle. At first, I convinced myself it was stress, the body's way of faltering under too much weight. But as the days stretched, a new fear grew, slow and deliberate, like mold on bread. My hands shook when I wrote the date in the notebook. The pencil snapped under pressure. I sharpened it, the shavings curling like secrets I didn't want but couldn't throw away. Pattern interrupt. Thunder rattled the windows that evening, rattled my bones, rattled the chair I'd wedged under my bedroom door. For a moment, the storm outside was louder than the storm inside me, and I almost thanked it. When I lay down, I pressed the notebook against my chest. Paper doesn't save you, but it witnesses, and sometimes that's all survival demands. A record. Proof that what happened wasn't a dream, wasn't an exaggeration, wasn't just me. Proof that the silence had teeth and it had bitten deep. The secret didn't stay secret. My body began to tell it for me, in whispers too loud to ignore. Nausea in the mornings, fatigue heavy as wet wool, the missed cycle that turned into two. I thought I could hide it under layers of clothes, under silence, under the habit of saying, I'm fine. But mothers are hunters of weakness, and mine sniffed it out like blood. One evening she dragged me by the wrist into the kitchen, her nails digging crescents that pulsed red. The overhead light hummed, throwing our shadows against the wall like accusations. She hissed, "What did you do? What filth have you brought into my house?" Her voice was sharp, surgical, slicing me open for inspection. I wanted to say his name. I wanted to point down the hall. But the word froze, a lump of ice in my throat. She slapped me across the face, hard enough to tilt the world. "You will not shame me," she spat. "Do you hear? You will not ruin this family. The irony nearly broke me. Family had ruined me long before. Pattern interrupt. A plate slipped from the counter, shattered into white shards that skittered across the tile. My mother didn't flinch. She just stared at me as if I'd broken along with it. At school, the whispers multiplied. Someone must have told, or maybe they just sensed it, the way predators smell fear. In hallways, I caught fragments: slut, liar, trash. The words clung to me like burrs. Teachers avoided my eyes, their politeness stretched thin, as though scandal might be contagious. I carried books like shields, but pages don't protect skin. One afternoon, a girl brushed past me in the bathroom, muttering, "God doesn't forgive girls like you." She washed her hands too long, eyes on the mirror, never on me. I wanted to scream that God hadn't been in my room that night, that he hadn't stood between me and the key on the nightstand. But my mouth stayed locked. When I came home 5 minutes late from school, my mother waited on the porch. The neighbors lingered in their yards, pretending to prune hedges or check mail. She yanked my arm, ripped my dress at the shoulder, and shouted, "You think you can dishonor me? You think you can parade your sin around?" The fabric tore with a sound that felt like bone. I stood in the yard, cloth hanging from me like surrender flags. Windows slid shut one by one. Curtains twitched. Nobody said a word. Pattern interrupt. A car backfired at the corner, startling a flock of birds into the air. They rose fast, wings frantic, then vanished beyond rooftops. For a second, I imagined being one of them, light, unshamed, gone. Inside, my mother shoved me toward my room. "Pray," she ordered. "Pray until God scrapes the dirt off you." She left the door wide open, because privacy was a luxury I didn't deserve. My brother leaned on the hallway wall, arms folded, watching like a spectator at a circus. His smile was thin, private, satisfied. He twirled the key once and walked away. That night I sat with the torn dress on my lap. I traced the rip with my finger, following the jagged line like a map of damage. The notebook rested against my chest, the only witness that never looked away, never blamed, never lied. I opened it and wrote the words I was afraid to say aloud. They want me gone. They want me erased. The ink bled a little, spreading veins across the page. I closed the notebook and pressed it under my pillow, hoping the springs would guard it better than the walls had guarded me. Pattern interrupt. Rain started suddenly, pounding the roof so hard it drowned out the sound of my own heartbeat. For once, the storm outside was loud enough to cover the storm inside. I closed my eyes and let the rain say everything I couldn't. The day my brother left, the house pretended to breathe easier. He didn't leave with drama, no slammed doors, no shouted promises, just a duffel bag over his shoulder and the key dangling from his fingers like an afterthought. He tossed it on the kitchen counter, metal ringing against wood, and grinned. "Don't wait up," he told my mother, though he wasn't coming back that night or the next. She didn't ask where he was going. She just nodded, jaw tight, eyes avoiding mine. For the first time in months, my chest expanded without the weight of footsteps behind it. I let myself imagine freedom. Rooms with doors that stayed shut, meals without stairs across the table, nights without the scrape of metal against my skin. I thought maybe the world had offered me a reprieve, a loophole. I thought maybe silence could heal if it wasn't punctured every evening. Pattern interrupt. A balloon popped in the street outside, a child's birthday gone wrong. The sound made me flinch, but then I laughed, a strange, brittle laugh, because for once it wasn't him. It wasn't the key. At school, I even smiled. Mrs. Hart noticed and said, "That's better." She didn't ask why, and I didn't tell. A friend of a friend slid me a note in math class. "You look lighter today." I folded it into a tiny square and tucked it into the notebook between entries, like evidence of hope. But relief is a cruel liar. With my brother gone, my mother's anger needed somewhere to land, and I was the only target left. Her eyes sharpened, her hands struck faster, her words cut deeper. She scolded me for leaving crumbs on the counter, for taking too long in the shower, for existing in ways she couldn't control. If my brother had been the storm, she became the aftermath. Flooded rooms, wreckage, rot. One evening she found me humming while I did dishes, a tune I barely realized I was making. She slammed the faucet off, water splashing my face, and snarled, "What are you so happy about? Do you think this house is free? Do you think you can laugh while I carry shame on my back?" Her palm landed across my cheek before the question had cooled. Pattern interrupt. A light bulb flickered overhead, buzzing like a fly caught in glass, then burned out. The kitchen went half dark. We both froze in the dimness, shadows stretched long on the wall. Then she turned away, muttering about wasted money, and left me standing there, face stinging, hands dripping soap. I began to understand. The brother was gone, but the prison remained. My mother carried his cruelty like a torch, lighting every corner of the house with it. The neighbors still looked through me. The teachers still kept their questions shallow. Silence was still the law. Late at night, I lay awake tracing the crack in the ceiling above my bed. I pressed the notebook to my chest and whispered into the dark, "Maybe he'll never come back." But even as I said it, I knew the truth. Absence isn't rescue. It's just a different kind of captivity. Pattern interrupt. A train horn wailed in the distance, long and mournful, rattling the glass. I imagined climbing aboard, disappearing past the horizon. For one moment I let the sound carry me, away from this house, away from her, away from all of it. When the horn faded, the silence felt heavier than before. The next morning, my mother's voice cut through the air like scissors. "You'll work harder now. You'll make up for everything." She handed me a list: groceries, chores, demands. The key may have left with him, but she had found her own, and it fit every lock inside me. I started working in secret because survival demanded it. At first, it was simple things: sweeping up at the corner store, stacking cans until my arms ached, folding shirts in the back of a thrift shop that smelled of dust and lavender soap. The owners paid me in cash, small bills folded into my palm with murmured thanks. I hid the money inside an old shoebox under my bed, between pages of the notebook, like proof that I could still build something of my own. Pattern interrupt. Once, while sweeping, I found a silver button on the floor, glinting like a coin. I slipped it into my pocket. It wasn't worth anything, but it felt like a charm, tiny, silent resistance. With every dollar I saved, I imagined escape: a bus ticket, a room with a door that locked, a life that breathed easier. The fantasy kept me steady while I scrubbed floors and wiped shelves. My hands blistered, but even blisters felt better than bruises. Work didn't hurt the way family did. Work didn't lie. But secrets don't stay hidden in houses that feed on suspicion. My mother found the shoebox one afternoon while cleaning. She stood in my doorway, the bills fanned out in her hand like a deck of accusations. "Where did you steal this?" she demanded. I stammered that I'd earned it, that I'd worked. She slapped the words out of my mouth and said, "Everything in this house belongs to me." She took the money, every last bill, and tucked it into her apron pocket. I heard the drawer slam in her room that night, the sound of locks clicking shut on what I'd bled for. Pattern interrupt. Outside, an ice cream truck chimed its song, children laughing as they ran. The melody floated in, cheerful and grotesque against the silence of my room. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound still reached me, mocking. At school, I kept my head down, scribbling equations I didn't care about. The teacher asked why I looked tired, and I muttered something about studying late. No one pressed. They never pressed. I realized people didn't want the truth. They wanted answers that let them go home untroubled. That night, I retrieved the shoebox, empty now, and placed the notebook inside. I wrote in large letters across the page, "She stole what I earned." The pencil broke under the weight of the sentence, but the words remained. I thought about the button in my pocket. I held it tight, round edges biting into my skin. Small, useless, ordinary, but it was mine. It reminded me I still existed outside her reach, even if only in fragments. Pattern interrupt. The wind rattled the broken window frame, blue tape trembling but holding. I touched it with one finger, steadying it, steadying myself. The tape had become my silent ally, stubbornly clinging, refusing to peel away even when the storm pressed hard. I fell asleep clutching the button, the notebook under my pillow. Money could be stolen. Work could be erased. But memory, that, I told myself, she couldn't lock away. The pain began as a whisper, low in my stomach, the kind of ache you convince yourself is nothing. I worked through it, folding clothes at the thrift shop, sweeping aisles, forcing myself upright each time my knees buckled. But the whisper grew sharper, a blade twisting without rhythm. By the time I made it home, sweat was cold on my skin, and every step felt like glass. My mother noticed, of course. She always noticed weakness. She looked at me, eyes narrowing, and muttered, "Good. Maybe God is fixing what you broke." I doubled over at the sink, clutching the counter, but she didn't move toward me. She just watched, waiting for the punishment to play out. Pattern interrupt. The radio on the counter crackled to life with a commercial jingle, bright voices singing about fresh bread, laughter layered over cheap music. The sound sliced through the moment like a cruel joke. Then it faded, leaving only my gasps and her silence. That night, the sheets were red. Too much red. My mother dragged me to the bathroom, shoved a towel at me, and hissed, "Don't you dare stain the floor." I sat on the tile, shaking, the world tilting in and out of focus. Something inside me slipped away, soft, invisible, irreversible. I pressed my hands to my belly, begging for stillness, for reversal, but there was no bargaining. Hours later, she emerged with a trash bag, her face tight, lips curled. "Now we can forget this disgrace," she said. "Now we can start over." She wiped her hands like she'd finished scrubbing a dish. Relief glimmered in her voice, sharp and ugly. I wanted to scream that I had lost more than she ever could imagine, that I had lost a piece of myself I hadn't even been allowed to love. Pattern interrupt. Thunder cracked so close it rattled the mirror on the wall. Lightning followed, white and blinding, reflecting for an instant the blood on my palms. In that flash, I looked like someone else entirely, haunted, emptied, older. When the storm passed, the house smelled of bleach. My mother had scoured the bathroom, erased the stains, erased the story. She moved through the halls lighter, humming as if she'd been delivered. I lay curled in bed, arms around my stomach, sobbing into the pillow to keep the sound small. The next morning, she placed a plate of eggs on the table and said, "Eat. Pretend nothing happened." My brother wasn't there, but his absence didn't soften her. She chewed slowly, eyes on me, daring me to speak. I swallowed tasteless food and felt it scrape all the way down. Later, when I was alone, I pulled the notebook from under my pillow. My hands trembled so badly the pencil carved jagged lines. I wrote, "She rejoiced, I mourned." Then I tucked into the pages a folded slip of paper the hospital had given me, a receipt with numbers and codes I barely understood. To me, it wasn't paperwork. It was proof that something had existed, however briefly, however brutally. Pattern interrupt. Outside, a train whistle screamed through the night, long and low, carrying with it the possibility of escape. I pressed the slip of paper against my heart and whispered, "One day." That night, I dreamed of a tiny heartbeat I had never heard, a hand I had never held. And when I woke, the silence in the house felt heavier than ever, as if it had swallowed not just me, but the ghost of what might have been. I found the old key in the shed behind the house, buried under rusted nails and a cracked mason jar full of screws. It was heavier than it looked, iron darkened by time, teeth jagged and blunt. I turned it over in my palm and thought how strange it was that a thing meant to open could also be a perfect weight for closing everything forever. The shed smelled of oil and damp wood. Rain had leaked through the roof in thin lines that streaked the dirt floor. I sat there in the dark, the key pressed into my palm until it left a mark, and wondered if anyone would notice if I vanished. My mother would call it a relief. My brother would laugh. The neighbors would shake their heads, mutter something about tragedy, and shut their curtains again. Pattern interrupt. A nail fell from a high shelf, clattered against a tin can, the sound sharp as a gunshot. My heart jolted so hard it hurt, proof that my body still wanted to live even if my mind wasn't convinced. I stayed in the shed long after the house lights went out, curled on the dirt floor, listening to the storm breathe through the broken boards. Thoughts of ending it circled me like vultures. Rope from the rafters, pills from the bathroom, a train that wouldn't stop. But each thought slipped away before I could hold it steady. The key was the only constant, its weight reminding me I had the power to lock myself out of this story. When dawn bled gray across the yard, I dragged myself inside. My mother barely looked up from her coffee. "Where were you?" she asked flatly. "Nowhere," I answered. And that was true enough. At school, the edges of me showed. A teacher asked if I'd finished my essay, and my voice cracked on the word yes. A boy behind me whispered, "She's losing it," and laughter rippled. I stared at the paper on my desk, the blank lines, and thought how easy it would be to stop filling anything in. Pattern interrupt. The intercom sputtered with static, then blared the wrong announcement, yesterday's lunch menu instead of today's. Everyone groaned and laughed. I didn't. I envied the machine for making mistakes people forgave. That night, back in my room, I placed the old key on my nightstand. It looked out of place beside the notebook, dull against the cheap wood, but I couldn't hide it again. I wanted it close, a reminder that even in captivity there was still a door. Maybe not an exit yet, but the possibility of one. I pressed the notebook open, pencil shaking in my hand, and wrote, "I thought about dying. I thought about ending it. But I am still here." The letters carved deep almost through the paper. I traced them with my finger until they blurred. Pattern interrupt. Outside, an owl hooted once, low and steady, a sound older than pain. I lay back, the key cold in my hand, and whispered into the dark, "Not tonight." The house slept on, unbothered. The walls didn't know how close they'd come to silence becoming permanent. The first time someone really looked at me, it was so unexpected I almost couldn't believe it was happening. I was sitting on the school steps after the final bell, clutching the notebook against my chest, trying to make myself invisible while the buses pulled away. My mother had forgotten me, or maybe she hadn't forgotten at all. Maybe she just wanted me to walk home alone. Mrs. Hart, my homeroom teacher, came down the steps with a stack of papers tucked under her arm. She paused when she saw me. Not the quick glance adults give before deciding not to get involved. No, she stopped. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle, careful, like she was approaching something fragile that might break if touched. I froze. The word fine was ready on my tongue. It always was, but something in her eyes stopped me. They weren't scanning for lies the way my mother's did. They weren't sharp like my brother's. They were steady, patient. Pattern interrupt. A gust of wind scattered a few of her papers across the steps. She laughed, a soft, unbothered sound, and we both bent down to gather them. One landed face up near me, a poem copied in her handwriting. The words "Hope is the thing with feathers." I pressed it back into the stack, fingers trembling. She sat beside me, close enough that I felt the warmth of her sleeve. From her bag she pulled out an envelope unmarked, sealed. "I don't know what you're carrying," she said quietly, "but I want you to have this." She didn't force it into my hands, just set it gently on my lap and waited. Then she stood, smoothed her skirt, and said, "My door's open, always." And she walked away. I stared at the envelope like it might vanish if I blinked. The paper was heavy, expensive, nothing like the torn notebook pages I clung to. I slipped it inside my bag, hidden between math worksheets. On the walk home, the weight of it felt like a second heartbeat. At dinner, my mother complained about bills, her words sharp enough to cut the meat on my plate. I kept my head down, but inside, I repeated Mrs. Hart's words, "My door's open," as if they were a spell. My brother smirked across the table, spinning the old key between his fingers. He didn't know about the envelope. For the first time, I had a secret that belonged only to me. Pattern interrupt. The phone rang in the middle of my mother's rant. She snatched it up, barked a hello, and turned her back. In the noise, I slid the envelope from my bag and into the pocket of my hoodie. My pulse hammered, but no one noticed. Later, alone in my room, I locked the door from the inside with a chair and opened the envelope under the thin glow of my lamp. Inside was a bus ticket, one way, out of town. Tucked with it was a folded note in neat script. "When you're ready, this is yours. You are not trapped forever." I pressed the ticket against my lips, the paper cool and real. Tears came fast, messy, unstoppable, but for once they weren't only pain, they were proof of possibility. Proof that someone had seen me, believed me, offered me more than survival. Pattern interrupt. A train horn wailed in the distance, long and low. For the first time, the sound didn't feel like mockery. It felt like a promise. I lay down with the ticket tucked inside the notebook, heart racing, whispering into the dark. Not tonight, but maybe soon. I woke with the bus ticket pressed between the notebook's pages, its thin paper already softening at the edges from my fingers. All day, it burned like a hidden flame. In class, while the others copied equations, I traced the ridges of the ticket with my thumb, whispering to myself, "This is real. This is mine." By evening, the decision had grown inside me like a second spine. I couldn't stay. Not another night of keys rattling in the hallway, not another morning of my mother's scorn folded into breakfast. I packed slowly, deliberately. The notebook, the folded hospital slip, the button I'd once pocketed like a charm, and the ticket. Symbols, all of them. Proof that I wasn't just debris drifting through someone else's storm. Pattern interrupt. The power flickered off for a heartbeat, plunging the house into brief darkness. My mother cursed from the kitchen, the sound jagged, then the lights returned. I stood in my room clutching my bag, heart pounding, and thought, even the house is warning me, now or never. When I stepped into the hall, my mother was waiting. She must have sensed it, the shift in me. Her eyes narrowed, her voice venomous. "Where do you think you're going?" I lifted my chin. My body trembled, but my gaze didn't drop. "Away." Her slap came sharp, stinging, but this time I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I held her eyes and let her see that I had already left her world. Rage twisted her face. She shouted curses, promises of damnation, of hunger, of regret. Behind her, the shadows of the hallway seemed to lean in, curious witnesses to the trial. Then my brother appeared, leaning against the wall with that thin smile. He dangled the old key between his fingers, the one he'd always used as a weapon. But something in my stance, or maybe the ticket-shaped defiance in my grip, made his smile falter for the first time. He didn't step closer. He didn't stop me. He just let the key hang, swinging like a pendulum, until my mother's voice filled the space instead. Pattern interrupt. Outside, a horn blared, sharp and impatient, a car waiting for someone who was late. The sound cut through her shouting like a blade. I moved past them both, one step, then another, my bag heavy on my shoulder, but my body lighter than it had ever been. My mother screamed behind me, words I'll never forget. "If you leave, don't come back. You're dead to me." I paused at the door, hand on the knob, and whispered back, "Then let me be dead." The night air hit me like baptism, cold, clean, alive. The street was empty, the world vast and trembling. I clutched the ticket in my pocket, the notebook pressed against my side, and walked toward the station lights glowing faintly in the distance. Pattern interrupt. A street lamp flickered as I passed beneath it, buzzing, then steadied. I smiled, small but real, and kept walking. Behind me, the house shrank, just another shape swallowed by darkness. Ahead, the tracks waited, humming with possibility. The station smelled of diesel, coffee, and beginnings. I sat on a hard plastic bench, clutching the notebook on my lap and the bus ticket in my fist until the ink from the print bled faintly onto my skin. When the headlights cut through the dark, my pulse raced, but I didn't turn back. Not once. Hours later, I stepped off into a town whose name I barely knew. The streets were small, the signs faded, but the air felt lighter, as if it hadn't learned to press down on my chest yet. I found work quickly, because places that smell of grease and bleach always need another pair of hands. A diner let me wash dishes in exchange for cash at the end of each shift. The pay was little, but the work was honest. Water on my arms felt different here, no longer punishment, but cleansing. Pattern interrupt. The first time I dropped a glass in the sink, I froze, waiting for the slap, the voice. But no one raised a hand. The cook just grunted, "Careful, kid," and turned back to the grill. My knees almost gave out with relief. I rented a room above the laundromat. The bed sagged, the window stuck, but the lock turned with a satisfying click. I lay awake that first night, testing it over and over, marveling at the sound. A door that held. A lock that obeyed me. Soon, faces in town began to stitch into my days. The old woman at the diner counter who always left a quarter tip and whispered blessings under her breath. The mechanic who fixed my shoes for free after seeing the soles peel. A girl my age who slipped me an extra sandwich at closing. None of them pried into my past. They didn't ask for stories. They offered small mercies without ceremony, and for the first time, kindness didn't feel like pity. It felt like oxygen. Pattern interrupt. One morning, the laundromat downstairs rattled with the rhythm of machines, a steady thrum like a heartbeat. I pressed my ear to the floorboards and realized it was the sound of other lives, other routines, all running alongside mine. It felt safe. I bought a cheap lock for my door and fitted it myself, turning the key with trembling hands. When it clicked, I laughed. Quiet, shaky, but real. The notebook lived under my pillow still, but now its pages carried new words. Job, bed, key. Words that tasted like progress, small bricks of a foundation I hadn't believed I could build. In the diner, I caught myself humming once while stacking dishes. My chest tightened, expecting rebuke, but instead the waitress beside me smiled. "Nice tune," she said, and kept working. My hands shook with the shock of it, music not punished but noticed. At night, I traced the ticket's faded edges, then tucked it between the notebook's pages. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was proof that I had crossed from one life into another. Proof that doors could open. Proof that running didn't always mean losing. Pattern interrupt. A train passed through town at midnight, horn echoing down the empty streets. I opened my window and let the sound in. This time, it didn't call me away. It told me I was already somewhere else, already free enough to dream. I fell asleep with the key in my palm, the lock secure, and the whisper of found family settling into the cracks where despair had once lived. The letter arrived folded thin, slipped under the diner's back door between the smell of grease and the clatter of plates. My name scrawled across the front in my mother's hurried hand. Seeing it was like swallowing glass. My fingers trembled, not from surprise, but from the weight of a voice I thought I'd buried. I carried it upstairs to my small room above the laundromat, the lock clicking shut behind me. I sat on the bed with the notebook beside me, the bus ticket tucked safely inside its pages, and stared at the envelope until the edges blurred. Finally, I tore it open. "Come home," it said. "I am old. I am tired. I am alone. Whatever happened before, we can start over. I need you." The words blurred with tears I refused to shed. Start over? As if bruises fade into forgetfulness, as if silence erases screams, as if keys spinning in the dark could be rewritten as love. Still a part of me ached, the child who once begged for her mother's arms, the child who still carried the shape of that hunger. Pattern interrupt. Outside, a church bell tolled, slow and heavy, though it wasn't Sunday. Each ring felt like a verdict. I laid the letter on the bed beside the old iron key I'd carried from the shed, the one that had once tempted me toward ending. Now it sat dull and cold, a relic. On the other side of me, the bus ticket waited, crisp even after all this time. Between them, the notebook lay open, its pages full of dates, bruises, lies, and proof. Past, future, testimony. I sat for a long time staring at the three objects, letter, key, ticket, each a doorway, each demanding a choice. My hands shook as I picked up the notebook and wrote, "If I go back, I lose myself. If I stay, I lose her." Pattern interrupt. A train roared through town, horn splitting the night. For once I didn't imagine running. I imagined choosing, truly choosing, for the first time. I folded the letter slowly, slid it back into its envelope, and placed it on the windowsill where the rain could find it if it wanted. The key I pushed deep into a drawer. The ticket I kept pressed against my heart. I whispered into the room, into the silence that finally felt like mine. Would you forgive, or would you choose the truth? The question hung in the air, unanswered, waiting for anyone who heard my story to decide. And for the first time, I didn't beg the walls to speak. I wanted the world outside them to answer.